Hello, everyone. A very good morning to those who are joining us from Singapore and Asia, and good afternoon or good evening to all of you joining us from other parts of the world. Thank you for being here with us for today's online event From Lab to Market, Journey of an Entrepreneurial Scientist, presented by SG Innovate. My name is Jin from SG Innovate, and as a Singapore government-backed investor, we have been building up and driving deep tech innovations in AI, healthcare, quantum tech, and autonomous technologies across various industries. At SG Innovate, we believe Singapore has the resources and capabilities to tackle hard problems that matter to people around the world. And SG Innovate has been established to help ambitious and capable people to build technology-intensive products born out of science research. Today, we have two of our deep tech entrepreneurs join us in sharing their journeys in transforming their lab prototypes to commercially viable products. We encourage you to engage with our speakers during the session by submitting your questions in the Q&A box located on the lower panel of your screen. So without further ado, I would like to invite one of our moderators for this discussion, Jasmine, to start us off. Jasmine, please.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our event. I'm Jasmine, Assistant Director from Venture Building Team of SG Innovate. I'm very excited to kick off and co-moderate today's event. Before we start, I would like to give you a brief introduction of SG Innovate Venture Building Team, in case you are new to our energetic and engaging venture building community. At Venture Building Team, we recognize that there is a large gap between lab and product, and then to commercial use and scalability. Many entrepreneurial scientists who work on deep tech research often lack the experience to successfully translate this research. They deserve the best and the most appropriate help in such endeavors. The Venture Building Team seeks to be of value to some of these innovators, employing our experience and network to maximize the chance of success to translate deep tech research projects into investor-ready startups. Our events always try to bring like-minded people together to share their insightful perspective on important topics. Today, the topic to be discussed is close to my heart, as I have been closely working with Dr. Lin on the CLICS project for more than 2 years. Just like all of you, I look forward to the opportunity to learn from our entrepreneurial scientist, Dr. Lin Lin, Senior Consultant ENT Surgeon, Lin Lin ENT and Hearing Center, and Dr. Joe Fitzman, CEO, Horizon Quantum Computing, sharing their journeys in transforming their lab prototype to commercially viable products, especially since they are from different industry sectors at different stages in their entrepreneurial journeys and facing different market challenges. A quick note on the event flow. We will start with a panel discussion co-moderated by my colleague, Shuchi, Director of Venture Building, and myself with both our speakers, followed by 2 Fireside Chat moderated by Shuchi and myself with Joe and Dr. Lin, respectively. Then we will have 15 to 20 minutes for a Q&A session. I encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A chat box on the Zoom. Shuchi, the speakers, and I will try our best to address all the questions you may have. Next, I would like to invite our speakers to introduce themselves before we start the panel discussion. Dr. Lin, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. And I'm a ear, nose, throat surgeon. I was with the Singapore General Hospital for about 10 years. Then after that, I moved to the National University of Singapore, and then also the National University Hospital. And in 2014, I left a public institution for private practice, and now I'm at the Mount Elizabeth Medical Center and Farrer Park Medical Center. Thank you for having me.
Joe, please.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me also. So my background is in physics. I did my PhD in Oxford on quantum computing. And I've worked in the field ever since. So I guess I graduated around 2007. I was a fellow of Merton College in Oxford for another 3 years before coming to Singapore. In Singapore, I was in the Center for Quantum Technologies. Eventually, I was a principal investigator there, and I was faculty at SUTD. About 2 years ago, I left that job, moving into Horizon as CEO to run the company, and I've been doing that ever since. So I got tenure and then pretty soon after immediately resigned. So I think that's a fairly unique path. But yeah, that's my background.
Great. And Suchi, would you like to have a self-introduction?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Suchitra Narayan, Suchi for short. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a director with SG Innovate's venture building arm. So very excited to be a co-moderator with Jasmine today because commercialization is something that I'm personally very passionate about. So excited to have this conversation with our two esteemed panelists as well.
Great. Okay, without further ado, let's dive in our panel discussion. So my first question for our panelists are, what were your motivations to go down the path as an entrepreneurial scientist, knowing that deep tech journey from lab to market is typically a long and challenging one? Were there any trigger events that made you want to take the leap? So I would like to have Dr. Lin to address this question first.
Okay, please allow me to just share 2 slides, 2-3 slides, because it's easier to understand.
Sure.
Just so I'm trying to share screen. Can you actually see anything? No. No, huh? Okay, yeah, sorry, yet. Just a while, huh? Just a while. No just problem. Quickly.
How about maybe Joe, would you like to
Sure.
start the question first?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I guess the entrepreneurship path has always been on the cards. So both of my parents started companies, and actually my mother runs a number of kind of government-backed programs for entrepreneurs in Ireland at the moment. So this has always been something that was on the cards for me, I think. And with quantum computing, I think we're at a point where the center of gravity is starting to move out of academia as the technology starts to become something that's more commercially viable. And it's starting to move more towards industry. So really, I thought that was where I was going to have the biggest impact at this point in my career, that I could really make the biggest effect on pushing the technology forward. The other thing that happened was that when I set up Horizon about I guess at the start of 2018, before any of us moved in, before we raised any money or anything like that, we knew that there was this transition in the field coming. So we knew that there was going to be this transition where quantum processors became hard to simulate. So this is sometimes called quantum supremacy or any number of other terms, but basically it means crossing a threshold where the quantum processors cannot be simulated easily on conventional computers. It doesn't yet mean they're useful for anything, but it's an important milestone. If you could simulate it, then it wouldn't be much use because you could just do whatever you would have done on your quantum processor on a regular processor, and that would just be much easier and much cheaper. So crossing this milestone was a big deal for our field, and we knew that it was coming. I guessed it was going to be it was going to happen in maybe the next 18 months. And I think it ended up being about 20 months or 21 months. It happened in November last year. Google announced this Sycamore processor that had for the first time achieved this threshold. So that was really a critical moment for the field. And in my mind, I was trying to get the timing right. I didn't want to be too early. If I jump too early and the hardware just isn't there, then that's hard for a software company. On the other hand, I didn't want to be too late. If I left it, waited until after this moment, then there'd be just a rush of others into industry and into starting companies. So that's really what prompted the timing of me setting up the company and kind of going down this path.
Great. Yeah, very interesting. Dr. Lin?
Yeah, I'll try to share again. If not, I'll just present without the slide. No problem. Can you see the slide?
Yeah. Now.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to just show you this because it's easier. So the middle ear that you see behind this eardrum is actually a really tiny space, just 1 cubic centimeters in volume, like the size of an NMM candy. And it is after this tunnel, which is dark, in a very small kit. It's only about 4 millimeter in diameter, about 1 centimeter in length. At the end of this, the eardrum is really paper thin and very sensitive to touch, very easy to injure. And we don't want to injure it, of course, because we could cause a perforation. There are 3 ear bones here, very tiny, that conduct sounds into the middle ear. So in children, because of frequent allergies, because they're sick often, because this ventilation tube, this natural ventilation tube is not matured, they tend to get fluid trapped in this space a lot. And that leads to not hearing well. That leads to frequent infections. You can get brain infections, and they don't learn well, they don't speak well. So in adults, it's a little bit different. We get all this fluid trapped here because maybe we have been flying often, we have allergies, we have sinus problems, we go diving. Yeah, so this problem, when it's a huge problem, medical treatment is not enough. So sometimes the surgeons have to go in during surgery and they make a small cut at this little area. This whole eardrum is actually less than 1 centimeter diameter. Make a small cut and they insert a tiny tube. This tube is 1 millimeter in size onto this part of the eardrum to artificially drain this fluid. All right, so the current procedure, however, has to be done under general anesthesia in a specific operating theater, which can be $1 million. You know, each time you go into a properly set up OT, you have to bring in a very, very big surgical microscope, 100,000 to 300,000 in cost. And you will see, just because it's a general anesthesia setup, there have to be anesthetists, assistants, technicians, a whole support team of 8 to 10, just for me to put this small tube onto the eardrum. And of course, for the child and the parent, it is a really quite frightening procedure because there is general anesthesia involved. And there have been associations, of course, with risk to brain development. And we need many, many multiple changes of instruments. So I think what really got me thinking the motivation was that in Cambodia, when I was doing surgery up in the remote mountains, I could actually just give local anesthesia onto the neck, remove a huge neck tumor, but I was not able to do this simple surgery of putting a grommet tube onto the eardrum for many children who had trekked for days just to reach there. The reason? No operating theater, no general anesthesia, no anesthetist, no microscope. So I came back to Singapore and I was really frustrated. But one day there was this aha moment, really aha moment. So I saw my daughter getting her ears pierced. And I was impressed because just with one click of the finger, just a little bit of pain, and then it was over. So I wanted to make clicks exactly like that. Something I put in my pocket, bring up the mountain with a click, makes a small, precise incision, and insert the grommet. So that's the motivation.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the inspiring story, Dr. Lin.
So with, I mean, this is really fascinating. 2 completely different journeys for Joe and Dr. Lin. And it sounds incredibly complicated as well. I'm not from the medical space. I'm curious to hear from both of you though, that when you have that research that you're so passionate about, or that one idea that you think you would like to pursue, what were some of the first steps you took to turn that idea into a possibility of a business? What is your advice to the audience? Where did you seek help? What kind of help is available? And is that really critical, or do you already know what the next steps are and how to launch this business?
I'll let Joe go first.
Oh, okay, sure. So for me, I was coming out of university. In principle, universities have research offices, have industry offices that are supposed to help with this process. So my first step was to talk to the industry office in the university I was, and also in the Center for Quantum Technologies where I was based, and get their advice on how to approach this. To be perfectly honest, that wasn't the most that wasn't the most illuminating process. I think one of the drawbacks that these offices have is that the people giving you advice haven't done it themselves. And so actually one of the best steps I made was I reached out to a couple of friends that I'd had in college who had gone on to start companies, and they were able to give very, very concrete advice on next steps, and they were also in some cases, you know, able to introduce me to other people that could help take things further. One thing I did fairly early on before we went out looking to raise money or anything like that was to register the company, to you know, to very clearly map out what the plan was and so on. I didn't want to be going around trying to raise money saying, you know, I want to set up this company to do X. I wanted to be in a position to say, this is what we're doing. The other thing that I did that worked out extraordinarily well, and is the reason I'm on the call at the moment, is that I reached out to a couple of contacts that I had made kind of incidentally at conferences and things like that. One of those was Steve Leonard. So I had talked at 2 previous MTech Asias, and Steve had also spoken at those, and we had met in passing. And so I reached out to him on LinkedIn, just said I was trying to grow my network, you know, that I was leaning more towards the commercial side, and he invited me out for coffee. And, you know, what was supposed to be a half-hour coffee, you know, ran into multiple hours, and, you know, he was asking what we were doing, what our approach was, and so on. And, you know, at the end of it, he was, you know, very willing to connect us with others, and, you know, for SG Innovate to consider investing in Horizon and so on. And, you know, from something where I hadn't reached out to try to get SG Innovate to invest or something like that. I just wanted to grow the network, and, you know, the opportunity to have coffee with someone that had more experience in the space, you know, that turned into something that has been really useful for us. Not just the investment, but also the advice, and, you know, kind of crafting our story and approach. So, you know, you can't really put a value on your network, on expanding your network into the relevant areas, and on, you know, tapping the knowledge of people you already know that have gone through kind of similar processes already.
Brilliant advice, Joe. Absolutely. Dr. Lin?
Yeah, so I think mine is a little bit different because the MedTech device space, the journey is actually really long. So I will be really, really honest with you. When I first started out, I knew nothing. And if somebody had told me it's going to take so long, I don't know. So, but when I first started out a decade ago, the innovation ecosystem for especially medical devices, surgical devices in Singapore was truly nascent. So the start was very painful, and I agree sometimes with Joe, and things took many, many times longer, you know, but we just try to do the best we can. So as a very young consultant surgeon at that time, I was actually focusing on trying to become a good surgeon, clinical work. And I thought, oh, once I secured my research grants and meet my quarterly reports, that's good. But along the way, I realized something really important, I think, for academicians to realize, that a research product that is in the lab is never going to help any patient. So I realized I needed to start learning from scratch, something which I have not been trained for. I needed to start learning commercialization. I needed to start speaking a new language. And because especially medical device innovations are very tough. They have this long 7-10 year runway before spinning to a startup. And the clinical trial at the end is high stake, it is costly, but no amount of laboratory work, cadaver work, animal studies can predict the different anatomies and the reactions that each individual patient can actually have, even after you account for differences in ages, genders, races. And another two very key barriers are that one, regulatory approval is really hard to get and differs country to country and are unpredictable. So like for Japan and India, China, America, Europe, it's all different. Additionally, for us in surgical device, insurers nowadays have unprecedented control over the adoption of new technologies and on patient care even. And so my product is for the patient, but my key stakeholders are the doctors, the insurers, the hospitals, the governments. It's even political sometimes. And so there is very, very uncomfortable tension between medical ethics, do no harm, trying to do good, the aggression needed to get to market, and your fiduciary duty to investors who have believed in you and put money with you. So many first steps to consider, not just focusing on the product. When I first started the 10 years ago, I really wasn't thinking so much, but the first thing I did was to seek out a very good collaborator. And I found that really in Prof. Tan Kok Kiong. I need to acknowledge him. I've been working with him for the last 10 years. He's just a brilliant guy, he's a very good guy. And we worked very hard to get institutional-based research funding initially. And we were lucky at that time, I think A-STAR Biomedical Engineering Program grant. Actually, they first believed in us and they gave us the POC grant and then the proof of value grant, about $2 million over 5 years to make a laboratory prototype. And they helped also by giving some consultants to advise us on the commercialization type IP aspects. But I think I would echo Joe, we were all learning together. There was many times it was not so useful. Sometimes it was very useful, but I think we were learning together, as an ecosystem trying to set up. Yeah.
So the common thread that I take away from both your conversations is it is the ecosystem, right? So reach out to the larger ecosystem. There's a big support network out there. You don't have to do this alone. And you just need to start reaching out to people and, things will soon fall into place. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And so we heard about how you start your deep tech journey. And we are also very excited to understand that so far, what milestone have you achieved? And what are your next major steps going forward? Can you share with us?
Sure. So from our perspective, one of the major milestones we did after raising our seed fund was to demonstrate a number of the kind of key technical results for what we're building. So we're building quite a complicated tool chain to take code written for conventional computers and automatically accelerate it using quantum processors. But there's lots of things that make this difficult. Quantum processors that currently exist are very, very imperfect. So we've put a lot of effort into both into analyzing classical code, breaking it apart and constructing quantum algorithms from this, but also into characterizing the real processors that we're faced with and trying to mitigate errors on them and so on. So, we were able to do a number of these things. Actually, another milestone we hit was a partnership with Rigetti Computing that gave us direct access to hardware. So we were able to implement a number of these things, rapid device characterization and things like this, using Rigetti's hardware. So we were able to map out imperfections in the device and to demonstrate a number of simple techniques to mitigate it, as well as being able to demonstrate some of these algorithm building techniques. Beyond that, that kind of happened at the end of last year. We also filed our first patents around that time. And we've, since then, we've also started working with first customers. At this point, we've had a very positive relationship, particularly with Rigetti. We were the first outside company to get low-level control to their device, and we were able to use that to try some more complicated things in terms of trying to mitigate errors. And so we were able to show off some of that earlier in this year before the pandemic closed down all the international travel. But yeah, that's that kind of brings us up to where we are today. We're still building. The major milestone in our future will be as we start to roll out a beta and start to work with a wider user base.
Great. Yeah. Dr. Lin, please.
Yeah, for us, I think because it's, the process is actually not very neat, linear march of ideation, POC, POV. So we have to consider very early on also, I mean, even much earlier before we actually start building the prototype, the key needs of the various stakeholders, or even do some preliminary market analysis, business modeling, because I think that is useful because it really informs on the actual product that we can have and we want to have. And so it's a very iterative process, actually working on the IP, regulatory, the reimbursement, all these aspects together. But I'm very pleased to say, at least after this time, we have patents granted in the first markets we want to enter. We have done market analysis, proper market analysis, and we have been working on the pre-submissions for regulatory clearances, which are crucial. So there is now a beta prototype. That means we have a prototype that is available to be used actually in humans, not just a lab prototype. And it is undergoing formal verification testing, risk analysis, QMS, implementation, ISO certification, and so these are really exciting times for us. A major next step in 2021 is that we're going to start our first-in-man pilot clinical trials. And soon, really, we'll have to start thinking about spin-off, startup company. We want to get married to a commercialization partner. We want to find our CEO. We're looking for good people and looking for advisory board. And we want to really start working on getting expansion funding for multi-site, multi-country clinical trials. So very exciting times, not where Joe is, but exciting times for us.
Great, yeah. Yeah, that was a very great investor pitch, Dr. Lin. Okay, so my next question is, now you look back and based on how far each of you have come on this journey, what advice would you have for your fellow would-be entrepreneurial scientists on the do's and don'ts, what to look out and what should be prepared, yeah, etc. Maybe this time we start with Dr. Lin.
You mean the do's and don'ts? Maybe I'll start with Joe. Start with Joe.
Oh, okay.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so now I can embarrass myself by giving advice that and then falling flat on my face. I think one of the most important things on this journey is that there's a lot to learn, and really, no matter what background we come from, there's things we don't know. So I like to think that I am fairly up to speed on quantum computing, but there are very many other aspects of the business where I have had a steep learning curve. Whether this goes from the kind of process of fundraising, whether it goes from the kind of legal side, things with filing patents, that kind of thing, whether it relates to to even the best approach to create a software product. So these things are things that you need to learn. You're not born with them. Whatever career path you take up to this point, there will be blind spots for sure. And one of the most important things you have, is an ability to learn, particularly if you're coming from academia. You've spent a lot of your life learning to learn, and so you should put that to good use. You should also maybe try to keep your ego in check, because it's very tempting to see, if you have some success in academia or something like this, to think you can do no wrong. It makes a lot of sense to listen to others, and pay attention to what they're saying. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't know your own mind. It doesn't mean that the buck doesn't stop with you. That if you're leading the company, you're the one making the decisions, and you need to own that. But you need to listen before you make those decisions. Once you make the decisions, it's set and you move forward from there. But you try to take all available information into account. So this also kind of leads into something that happens when you come out of academia. Often people coming from academia will want a flat structure and kind of collective decision making. But at the same time, there needs to be some form of accountability. And if you're leading the company, really, you have to take responsibility for that. So once a decision is made, you need to have the willpower to stick that course, or to adapt if the facts change. But that's on you. It's you making the decision. You take responsibility for it. You should listen to everyone before making those decisions, but ultimately you need to be accountable for your own decisions.
You're done, Joe? You're okay, Joe? You're finished?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think for myself, I think just some do's and don'ts. I think it's easier because it's a very long journey that we are working for a cause and not that we really believe in, and not just the product, right? So because that's needed to drive and to sustain you for really the next 10, 20 years. And I think we want to be very clear what the business is about, so that we can be very clear where the key focus is and how we need to prioritize, especially if time is tight and especially if there is limited funding, right? I think it's for academicians, I think it's important we realize that unless we're able to present a very clear and very compelling vision, we're never going to get the product out of the lab to get investors willing to invest in us. So for the perfect product, I think it's good to really, for something that takes so long, to think of 100 times better product, not just a 2 times better product, because by the time it's 10 years later, maybe your product will be irrelevant if you're thinking too small, right? So you really, for me, I did not want to think about what the current technology was that was needed to support clicks. I remember talking to my engineers and telling them I want this, 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 and then I did not care at all whether the technology was there. All right, because I believed we should be optimistic. We should allow technology to catch up. And I believe if, let's say, there was no local anesthesia that was available, then I believed if I made the product, the local anesthesia would be available because people would work, academicians, clinicians would work to fill that space. I agree with Joe, people are really the most important. So people skills are very important. The team is all important. But a lot of times we have to, I think, manage ourselves. So I think sometimes as academicians, we think, we do not realize how important also that many things, especially in health, things can be very sensitive, politically sensitive even. And the network is important. So I think we want to be able to also take very crushing feedback. We want to really take audits properly. We want to really give credit to people who are executing day in, day out in your team. Yeah, and they're really so important. So if there was any one thing I say we don't do, I would say, I think I've had fights sometimes with my team because of this. I do not think we need to be too enamored by key opinion leaders who are on paper key opinion leaders, all right, by celebrities, by expensive market reports. If it's something in MedTech that takes a 10-year journey, because why? The reason is that if your product is so innovative, there's not going to be any market research available yet. And there's not going to be key opinion leaders available for that. So sometimes I have actually tried not to ask key opinion leaders too early, because I believe that it's detrimental, right, to the product. And for academicians, I think many of us, we are not used to legalities, of agreements. We are sometimes very lax with confidentiality. We talk to everybody about our product. We have students coming in and out of our labs. We present at conferences. We want to write that next paper. But all this may actually infringe on our intellectual property. So I think to be very careful with that, and to do the actually the patent and the freedom to operate very early, even put some funding on that. Yeah, thank you.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to add two things that I should have said earlier on that are maybe kind of soft, but are maybe worth knowing if you're starting. One is that the journey is an emotional roller coaster, and you need to be prepared for that. And the second thing I was going to say is that this comes back to something Dr. Lim said earlier, which is that there's a tension between professional ethics, your fiduciary agreement, your fiduciary duties, and also the commercial side. And ultimately you're selling things. But for us, one of the things we've decided is that we will not compromise our professional ethics in any way by, in our case, overhyping quantum computing, for example. Now, fundamentally for me, I believe it's computing all over again, which is obviously the hypiest thing I could possibly say. But I also know that the timeline is uncertain. So I don't feel bad about communicating my belief that it's potentially completely transformative, but I'm very careful about giving an accurate picture of uncertainties and timelines, an accurate picture of the current technical landscape, and so on. And actually, while you might think that puts people off, my experience has been the opposite, that actually it gives people more confidence in you, that they're more likely to take seriously what you say. They don't think you're trying to push something on them that's not what they need. So that's been my own approach to this. Particularly in medicine, I'm sure Dr. Lin has found this even more so to be the case, that professional ethics are important. But it's something that comes up a lot of the time with people coming from academia to industry.
Good advice, Joe, and thanks for adding that in. On that note, what we might do is Joe and I might slip out to a side chat while Jasmine and Dr. Lin, may I just request you to stop your videos? Let's discuss with you, Joe, because I know we do have some engineers, some quantum physicists, some people interested in quantum technologies in the audience. So let's just focus a little bit and have a 10-minute side chat on that. So one, if I were to start on this discussion, if I think of quantum technologies, it's far from mainstream tech, right? It is something that is still so nascent. So how does one actually evaluate the opportunity to consider whether you should pursue starting a company founded on the research?
Sure. So one thing I would say is quantum computing is hard. I'm sure this is true for many different areas, for deep tech in general. But you shouldn't jump into quantum computing willy-nilly if you're in a tangentially related area. Really, there are a lot of problems in quantum computing. There's a lot of hard technical problems that need to be overcome before the devices are useful. So anyone starting a company now, in my view, should be focused on building technology that moves quantum computing forward rather than uses of quantum computing. So if you're focused on using quantum computing for a particular application, you're faced immediately with the fact that quantum computing isn't useful today. Now, maybe it is, maybe Google has shown something, or IBM, and the paper hasn't come out yet. But, you know, there is nothing in the public record to indicate that quantum computers are useful today. It's something that will happen, but it's something we need to get to. And so your very first focus should be on getting us there quicker. Not on what we're going to do, you know, not on building a company centered around use cases for something that isn't quite there yet. The other thing I would say in terms of this is that you know, for me, I view a lot of this through a historical lens. So a lot of the time when I give public talks, I talk about the comparison of timelines between quantum computing today, you know, from the late 1980s, 1990s until the present, compared to the early history of computing, and they line up pretty well. Actually, there's similar applications, similar milestones, but it puts us at, you know, kind of 1950 or something in the classical computing timeline. So you can believe that there's this huge future market, but we're not quite there yet. There are potentially use cases now, there are potentially businesses to be built now that have the potential to become enormous, but we're still early, and we need to be cognizant of that. And, you know, having a look at this kind of historical timeline is useful. I think of it as kind of a secret treasure map or something, because people already put in a lot of the hard work in the 50s and 60s in figuring out what computers were good at, figuring out all of the different things that needed to be overcome to get us to today. So by being able to look at that, we can see the path that maybe quantum computing needs to take. The other thing I would say about this is that you shouldn't, there's a lot of following the herd. So a lot of quantum computing companies that start up now end up doing the same thing. They're all, you know, there's a lot of companies that are doing some kind of consulting using variational algorithms for, these are sometimes called NISQ algorithms for particular purposes, focused on different industries and so on. But really the true value to be created, in my view, is by filling the gaps that no one's tackling at the moment. And there's loads of them. The thing about quantum computing is that the field is so small, there's not enough people to tackle all of the interesting problems. You see this, for example, there's a company called Q-Control that has been on Twitter today because they've shown performance increase on a number of different hardware platforms in terms of you know, how well the gates can be made to work and so on by crafting the pulses that are used in them. Now, in principle, you would think all of the hardware manufacturers were relentlessly working on optimizing their pulses, so it should be very, very hard to do any better than the hardware manufacturers already are. But the reality is there's a manpower shortage, and there's just not enough people to be getting every possible part of either the hardware stack or software stack to be working right at its limit. And there's a lot of scope to contribute there. And I think really that's where companies can create value now, by finding these areas that are not currently being tackled, that are not currently being addressed, and by making an impact there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So those in the audience who are interested, I think that's a great point. Look for the market gaps, and I think Joe would be happy to have a conversation with any of you one-on-one if you wanted to pursue that path and give you some advice on the journey that he's been through. If you buy him lunch or coffee, right, Joe?
So yeah, anyone that's interested can email me at joe@horizonquantum.com.
Perfect. So I want to switch gears a little bit. So that was the technical side of things. But having worked with deep tech founders for about 2 years, I find that there's also, you know, you all are brilliant scientists in your own right, in your own fields. But when you plunge into a startup world, plunge into the role of a CEO, there's a massive element of business knowledge, of business management, of the softer skills, organizational skills, which can be equally challenging. So what were some of those, and how did you actually tackle those?
Sure. So that's a good point. There are a couple of things that are different, but there's also quite a lot that's similar. So it may not be natural to think of people coming from academia as managers, but the reality is, if you're a scientist coming from a faculty position or something like that, you already lead a research group. In my case, my group was about 14 members when I left, or rather, in the year before I left. So what that means is you've already quite a bit of experience in terms of managing a team. I think, some of the things that are harder, one of them is this tension that I mentioned earlier and that Dr. Lim also brought up about the interplay between kind of professional ethics that you really come up in when you come from a scientific background, and the pressure to convince investors, the pressure to convince potential customers of the value of what you're doing. And for us, as I said previously, we've made it a point to try to give people accurate pictures and trust that they will see the value of what we're doing. And not everyone does. For sure, we talk to investors that don't invest. We talk to people that don't become customers. But it's, actually with a pretty high success rate. And as I said, I really think that if you're kind of upfront, the kind of outlook that you have as a scientist, the kind of focus you have on being precise about what you're saying and that what you're saying is accurate, I think it comes across, and I think it's reassuring to people, both to potential customers and to potential investors, because they see you're being careful. They see that you've thought about the different aspects, and that you're not, that you're not pushing something that isn't a good solution, that isn't real, or that isn't, that's not the right fit for them, or that is an unrealistic view of technology. So,
and you mentioned team and people, right? Here as well, and you've got an impressive team that you've built out at Horizon. You've got PhDs from some of the top institutions, yourself from Oxford, you've got MIT, Berkeley, and I think University of Waterloo, Melbourne, all of that on your team. So is talent really difficult to find in Singapore? And I'm really curious to understand what is the type of individuals or qualifications that fit nicely into a quantum startup? If I'm somebody in the audience and I'm looking to be a part of a startup journey, how do you decide what nature of talent would be right for you?
Sure. So, one of the things about quantum computing is that it's a global effort. There is not very many people that work on it, at a kind of global level. It's, a number of people that are seriously working on the kinds of things we care about is at most maybe a couple of hundred. Quantum computing more generally is maybe 1,000, maybe a bit more. So people are scattered all over the globe. One of the advantages we have being in Singapore is that the Center for Quantum Technologies is just across the road from us. And CQT has been enormously successful in attracting talent in the area to Singapore. Both there are people coming over to do postdocs and finishing postdocs. There are students that are working in the area, doing PhDs, doing masters and so on, that, then come out of the university, and Horizon is obviously a possible destination for them. So that's been an enormous resource for us. That said, we really do need to consider hiring globally because it is such a small talent pool. for the kind of thing we're doing on the very technical quantum side of the spectrum, end of the spectrum. That said, one of the major advantages of starting a company rather than continuing to work in my former research group is that when you're building a research group, really what you're doing is you're creating people that aim to be kind of like you. Not necessarily personality-wise, but in terms of career. A lot of them are aiming for academic careers. Postdocs are, wanting to go on to a faculty position a lot of the time. They're looking to lead their own groups and so on. So you're creating people that are really there to bulk up their skills in an area that you're already very skilled in. And a lot of those people will already be very skilled in it as well. But it's all about focusing on that area, really like pushing knowledge forward in a very particular area. And each person individually is maximizing for that. In Horizon, in a startup in general or in industry in general, one of the advantages you have is that you can hire people that aren't like you, and that's really important. This is important both on the technical side. My background's theoretical physics and then kind of theoretical computer science, but I'm not a JavaScript developer. But that's something we need. We need UI UX developers. Designers. We need people doing marketing and communications. We've recently hired a new marketing and communications manager who's very experienced in industry, and that has been a great move for us because she has skills that we don't, that the rest of us don't have. It's not in our background.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I was saying that's fantastic. So for those in the audience with those skills, I would actually recommend that you reach out to Joe and, reach out to him on LinkedIn and see if there's a potential fit if you want to be a part of this wonderful, exciting journey with Horizon. But on that note, Joe, I think we'll have to park some questions and put yourself and myself on mute and hand back to Jasmine and Dr. Lin.
Sure.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate the candor and appreciate your responses.
Yeah, thank you, Suchi. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, Dr. Lin. Yeah. So let's. I would actually only have a couple of questions I would like to ask you because I remember back then when you finished up the BEP grant from A-Star. You were planning to start the journey on product development and design for manufacture. What were the key capabilities and resources were needed? And were there other options than SG Innovate there for you? And why do you choose to work with us?
So I'm going to, just so that it's useful for, I think maybe people like me, who are starting this, who are somewhere along this journey. I just want to share two main things, and before I come to SGI. So I think when I left public institution in 2014, funding became a huge worry because in Singapore, once you leave the public research institutions, there's no real research grants open to you as a private researcher. And so that is especially tough. And I think for a MedTech, medical device, surgical device development, because as you remember, it takes a 10-year journey. So I think this should be changed. I would like one day to, even be in a position to bring the private and the public research sectors closer together, for there to be grants that the private doctors can tap on, private engineers can tap on, and also for maybe the private sector to raise their own research funds, why not, yeah? And because actually the switching over to private practice has been very instructive. It has forced me to see things with a fresh pair of eyes, to learn about the real walls of the world outside the safe havens of the university. And so I can see that we can really tap so much talent all over, private sector, public sector, if we can have grants, funding possible for these very talented people who may have to come up because of personal reasons, family reasons, it's such a long pathway. So when the A-Star grant ended in 2018, really, we were standing over the valley of death, if you really the valley of death. Because by then we had a very promising prototype, a laboratory prototype, but we needed another maybe $3+ million in funds to bring this laboratory prototype to a clinical viable prototype that could be used in humans. And we also needed funding actually not just to be working on the product, but to be thinking on the whole commercialization journey, working on the IP, very expensive, working on starting to think about reimbursements, quality management systems, getting approvals, and really planning for clinical trials. So all this need a different kind of funding that the usual research funding in an academic institution may not be able to offer, or may not be able to offer fully. So we had no real choice. We couldn't get research funds. We started thinking, okay, maybe we should go to investors. So we looked at investors in Singapore, but investors in Singapore shy away a little bit from medical, technological, surgical, invasive devices. They prefer devices or technologies which are later stage projects, which have been de-risked after clinical trials, but we needed money to get to clinical trials. And they much prefer working on maybe things faster to market, like digital stuff, software stuff. And so like maybe the investors, incubators that we spoke to, some would offer us very little funding, but wanted a very huge stake in the ownership of Clicks, which I totally understand. But as a founder, I was not willing to really give up so much because I could not continue to have a say in how Clicks was going to develop. And of course, we always think we know it better. So at this critical juncture, we were very lucky to partner with SGI. And there's a little bit of a story behind this. I was working with Howard Californo. I'm very grateful to him on actually another project of mine on a smart grant at Create. And he introduced me to Mr. Steve Leonard, who is the founding CEO of SGI. We pitched to him in 2016, way before SGI was founded. And at that time, we had no idea that SGI was going to be this huge, mammoth thing, and that it's going to be so cool. But we really liked that. How Steve and his team really listened to us, and we really liked the working relationship. So way before SGI was founded, we actually decided we wanted to work with SGI. At that time, the other grants that were available at NUS were not available then. Nowadays, NUS, I think they are very good grant funding also for such commercialization efforts. For example, the Jumpstart and the GRIP grants, all right? But SGI has really been crucial because together with SGI, we managed to pitch successfully for the NRF grant, which has given us this extra $3 million to bring this to FIM. And it has given us project leads and Jasmine, previously Rob. They have helped us to actually sort out legalities. Very important because as academicians, we were not very good with all this. Sort out the legal stuff for getting the development license from NUS, starting to do all this very important IP work, negotiating with a better space, working with key manufacturers, working on market analysis, regulatory. And we will be pitching for expansion funding soon. So of course, SGI is a very important partner. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ling, for your sharing. So we are actually running almost, now it's time to complete our event. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I hope you have learned as many insights as I do. Thank you for our panelists, Dr. Ling and Dr. Joe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you both. Wonderful panel. Thank you to the audience as well and to our community team for organizing.
Thank you.
Thank you.